What is going on, guys? It is Evan from Coaster Revolution, and I am back from a few-week hiatus. Hopefully you didn't miss me too much, and I hope you all have been doing very well. But today we're going to be looking at all of the current operating roller coasters at Cedar Point to see what I think of them, to see where I rank them, and what my thoughts are. And then I also want to hear your thoughts down in the comments below. A lot of these roller coasters are really polarizing here at Cedar Point, so it's totally okay if you don't agree with me. Let's find out where we agree and disagree down in the comments and get some good discussions going down there. I am back to making weekly content, so make sure you like this video if you enjoy it, and to subscribe for more similar coaster content coming your way very soon. But anyways, let's get straight into this thing. Let's start off with Gemini. And I really enjoy Gemini. Gemini is a great roller coaster. I'm giving it a solid 8 out of 10. Oh, well, there's a car alarm. Hopefully you don't hear that outside. It definitely isn't as smooth as it has been in the past. It's been pretty jerky and kind of rough a little bit, but it surprisingly has really good forces. You get some airtime on it, you know, have some pretty strong laterals. It's really fun to be racing the other train. If it's a busy day, usually they'll have it racing, but they haven't been racing it as much recently the past year or so. And I believe Gemini was the world's tallest and fastest roller coaster when it opened in 1978, so that's pretty cool. Let's do Iron Dragon. And Iron Dragon is polarizing for me because I think it's a super boring ride, right? I think it's really slow. I'm going to put it in okay, because I know it's not really for me. It's more of like a family ride, but I don't know that it was intended to be a family ride when they built it. It's just really slow, and especially compared to the Bat at Kings Island, it's boring. It doesn't do a whole lot. It does like kind of swoop over the water towards the end of the ride, which is pretty cool. But it's not something I'm going to go out of my way to ride when I'm at Cedar Point. I would go and just get this credit, and don't expect a whole lot. Don't expect a lot of forces. Don't expect any airtime, of course. It's just kind of a scenic ride over by the island at Cedar Point. You can also get a pretty good view of Dragster and Millennium Force on this ride, too. Speaking of Dragster, let's go ahead and do that one. I think Dragster is an elite ride. It's a 9 out of 10. The only reason it's not better is because it's way too short. I'm making this video in January of 2023, so we don't know what the new Dragster is going to look like at this point yet. We know it's going to get a new launch for sure, but I'm hoping they extend the layout or do something else with it, and it's not just the exact same thing with just a new name and a new launch system. If Dragster gets an extended layout, it could easily go into the super elite category and be a potential top 10 roller coaster in the US, if not the world. As of right now, I'm putting it in the elite category. Dragster in its old state, I think, is an elite roller coaster because it's so iconic. You know, Dragster opened as the tallest, fastest roller coaster in the world at 120 miles an hour and 420 feet tall. It's just a crazy, wild experience. If you've never ridden something like this before, you absolutely have to do it. That's what makes it an elite roller coaster. It's so intense. It's a one-of-a-kind experience in the world. Of course, you have King Ka and a couple other launch coasters that now offer a similar experience, but you have to ride Dragster. It's that crazy of a thrill and a response. So it's worth a long wait if you haven't ridden it before. But since I have ridden it, it's only like a 17-second ride in its old state, so I wouldn't wait more than an hour for this now. And that's the reason I'm putting it in the elite category. It's just too short. It's just too short for it to be any higher than this. But I know quite a few people who think Dragster is their top #1 overall coaster in the world, and I totally see why. Let's go ahead and do Gatekeeper. And Gatekeeper right now is my favorite wing coaster. I'm going to put it in the great tier. Gatekeeper is almost elite for me, but not quite. I just think that the wing coaster models aren't intense or have enough airtime for me to put it any higher. That wing over drop right off of the lift hill is probably the best part of the ride. You get some crazy like lateral hang time there. It's just really awesome. It's a long ride. It feels good. You know, you get those near miss elements going through the keyholes over the gate. It's just a great picturesque roller coaster. Great color scheme. You can't complain with Gatekeeper, and I love this ride. It has great capacity too. You can almost always expect this to be open and for the line to move pretty quick, unlike a lot of the other roller coasters at Cedar Point. So I'm definitely keeping this in the great tier, almost elite tier for me. Up next, let's get the kiddie coasters out of the way. Wilderness Run. It's a kiddie coaster. I'm not going to say that it's bad. I haven't been on it, but it's not marketed for me, so I'm not gonna bash it or anything. I believe this is Intamin's first roller coaster too, so that's pretty interesting and pretty cool that Intamin's first project was at Cedar Point. And hopefully they will work with them again someday. And also Woodstock Express, also going to put it in an okay tier. It is what it is. It's a kiddie coaster again. I'm not going to bash it too much. Now let's move on to Rougaroo. Now Rougaroo is pretty polarizing. It's not that great. It's not horrible. I'm going to put it in okay above Iron Dragon, because at least it has some forces. It can be pretty rough, and there's a lot of headbanging that's very possible on this ride. Again, this used to be called Mantis, which was a stand-up roller coaster. It was the longest, tallest stand-up coaster when it had opened. back in the 90s, but they converted it to those sit-down floorless trains back in, I think it was 2013 or 2014, and renamed it to Rougaroo, which I think is a really dumb name because no one really knows what a Rougaroo is, and it's just very cryptic. And honestly, this is probably one of the most forgotten roller coasters. I'll probably make another video on this topic too, but like the most forgotten roller coasters at a park. Rougaroo is probably the most forgotten roller coaster at Cedar Point, if not one of the most forgotten coasters in the world. It's just for being at a main park, you know what I mean? Because like there's a lot of roller coasters that nobody knows about, but Rougaroo is just so forgotten because it's just, you have to go out of your way to avoid Millennium Force, and it's like sandwiched between Iron Dragon and Millennium Force. And I've never waited more than like 5 minutes for this ride, even on the busiest of days. So I don't know if people just don't like it and they avoid it, or they don't feel like going back there and riding it. It's just crazy. But it does have some really good forces, and I've had some good rides on this before. But I'd say probably two-thirds of the time I come off with a slight headache just from the head banging. And some of the inversions are pretty janky, but it's very forceful. I do enjoy it from time to time. It's great if you want to get a ride in at Cedar Point. You don't want to wait 2 hours for Steel Vengeance or Maverick or something like that. So yeah, I'm going to keep Rougaroo at okay. I think this ride would be served so much better if it was at a different park and it could actually be appreciated for what it is. I think I've said in the past, you know, go put this ride up at Michigan's Adventure, relocate it there, and then Cedar Point can build something else really cool there on that island. Maybe a new ride or even a new themed area or something cool. So I still think they should do that. Okay, next, let's do Cedar Creek Mine Ride. And the Mine Ride is also meh. It's not that great. I'm gonna say it's slightly below Iron Dragon because it's boring, but it also can be kind of painful. It's pretty old. It's like, I think it was built in 1964, so it's one of the oldest aero mine trains too. So it makes sense that it was pretty tame, but also very janky because again, all of these old aerodynamics coasters were designed without computers. So all of these things and the welds and everything that were done, they're done by hand, and all of these calculations are done by hand. So it makes sense that the rides are janky. But again, this is like a family coaster too, so it is going to be more tame, but it's also pretty janky too. So I wouldn't go out of your way to ride this. It usually has a shorter wait. You know, it usually doesn't have more than a 30-minute wait at Cedar Point. So if you want to get the credit, and if you want to not wait as long as like 2 hours like Maverick always is, then get on Cedar Creek Mine Ride, but don't expect too much from this ride. All right, let's go ahead and do Valraven. Valraven is a great ride as well. I'm gonna put it just above Gemini, but below Gatekeeper, because a lot of the dive coasters feel very similar, and Valraven has those vest restraints, but that doesn't stop the fact that it has some awesome hang time on the inversions, and of course the great drop that dive coasters always have. It has a great drop. Again, it's best in the front row probably, and then second best in the back row. The middle's, it's okay, it's not bad, but the back row, you just get yanked over that first drop and the second drop off the mid-course brake run. But of course, in the first row, you have the greatest angle facing towards the ground, so the first is probably the best. You get all the air in your face too. But if you're not in the first row, try to get the back row if you can. And this is the kind of roller coaster where you would want to experience it in all 3 rows anyways. I do think dive coasters can be a little repetitive and a little boring at times, so that's why I'm not ranking it any higher than I have here. I think great is a pretty solid spot for it, and I think where a lot of people would put it. A lot of general public really love dive coasters, so this can get a really long line, and deceptively long. I've been to Cedar Point one time where this ride broke down multiple times, and they seem to have trouble running 3 trains on this. Like, they put a 3rd train on, and then half an hour later they had to stop, and they had some sort of mechanical issue, and then they had to take the 3rd train off again. The dispatches were so slow that it didn't even matter that they had 3 trains on the ride. They wouldn't be dispatching the next one until that other train was back into the station anyways. So the operations on Valraven leave much to be desired, especially from the last year, 2022, when I was there. But it is a good ride. The GP love this ride, so be aware of that when you're at Cedar Point as well. Alright, up next, let's do Magnum XL200. Alright, and this is probably one of the most polarizing roller coasters that's out there. I know a lot of enthusiasts that think it's the best ride, it's one of the best rides at the park, you know, in their top 10 as well, because it has such strong airtime. I know a lot of people that hate it, because the airtime is so painful. And those bunny hills at the end are basically just like triangle-shaped, which is just hilarious. But I'm somewhere in the middle, and I might be a rarity, because usually people either love this ride or hate this ride. And I usually come off of this ride either having one of those 2 thoughts, but I'm going to put it somewhere in the middle because it really depends on the kind of ride that I have on this thing. I've come off with bruises on this ride before because the airtime is so strong and the restraints are so bad that it can be really painful sometimes. So after those kind of rides, like I've like felt pain in my back from this ride too before because some of the transitions are so janky and the airtime is so intense. So after those rides, I'm like, oh, this ride sucks. This is horrible. Why would anyone wait to ride this ride? But then I've also come off of it sometimes where the airtime isn't so painful, it's tolerable, and it's really enjoyable. So in that sense, it could be almost like elite because the airtime is so good, and it's such an old gem of a ride. And of course, it was the first hyper coaster too, the first coaster over 200 feet tall. So I'm gonna put it somewhere in the middle, almost in the good tier. But I'm gonna put it right behind Gemini. Actually, I think that's where I'm gonna put my final spot of Magnum, just because it's so polarizing. Sometimes I love it, sometimes I hate it. It's a love-hate relationship with me and Magnum XL200. All right, let's do Blue Streak. And I know some people that love Blue Streak. I think it's it's okay. I'll put it, let's see, I'll put it just behind Rougaroo. And this might change because I know they do extensive retracking sometimes on Blue Streak, and I haven't really kept tabs as to what years they've been retracking it. But when I was riding it in 2022, oh, it was so rough, it was so unbearable, and everyone came off of it just like, oh, that was horrible. Everybody on our train. But if you get a middle row or like not a wheel seat, then it's bearable, and the airtime's actually pretty good. But most of the other times, if you're on a wheel seat, good luck to you. This is a rough ride. Hopefully it's going to be smoothed out after the next time that they retrack this thing. Now let's do Corkscrew, and Corkscrew, sadly, in its state today, is a horrible, bad ride. It's rough, it's way too short. It usually doesn't have much of a line because people don't like it and they know to stay away from it. But it's just not good. I think this is the next roller coaster at Cedar Point that's going to get torn out for something new, maybe a new expansion, maybe a new roller coaster in its place, maybe Dragster's layout will be extended to this area. Who knows? But I do think Corkscrew is on its last leg. Like I said, it's rough. It's not very fun to ride. Like, it's one of those that's a one and done. You ride it to say you've been on it, to get that credit, and then every time you just walk past it and you go and ride something better. You know, you got Magnum pretty close. You got Dragster. When it reopens, that's going to be much better. Like, this is just one of those that you just walk past after you've ridden it the first time because it's not that enjoyable. It's a short ride. And I'm sure it used to be much better, but in its current state, it causes a lot of head bashing. You know, expect a headache when you get off of this ride if you aren't in a certain row. Like, it's really hit or miss on this ride too. This is the kind of one where you don't want to ride it early in the day because you don't want to get a headache and have it for the rest of the day. So that's just my piece of advice to you on Corkscrew. Now let's get to, I think this is Raptor, right? Raptor's pretty good. It's also pretty polarizing. I know some people that think this is the best B&M invert. I don't think it is, but it's one of the better ones for sure. It's in the top. Definitely it's in the upper tier of B&M inverts, I think. It's very intense. So that's awesome. It's very intense. It doesn't have a slow spot. Really strong positive Gs. Really great inversions. It's very whippy. One of the best layouts of a B&M invert, but because it is so intense, it can cause some really bad headbanging sometimes. And there's certain rides where it's running so fast and it's awesome, but you get a head smasher moment, one or two, which is not enjoyable. Otherwise, I'd probably rank this higher. I'll put it above Valraven just because I think it is a little bit more enjoyable and intense than Valraven. Even though Valraven has more airtime, I think Raptor's intensity brings it above Valraven in that sense. So it is a great ride. It's one of the better B&M inverts, but just be careful. Try not to smash your head because it is so intense. But just be aware, like, you're going to have a lot more airtime because it doesn't have those vest restraints that are on, like, Banshee at Kings Island. And so you're going to get a lot more airtime. You're going to get flung around in your seat a lot more. So just make sure to try to protect your head and your neck as much as possible because this ride is pretty intense. Now, finally, we get to the big three at Cedar Point. I'm sure this is what most of you are waiting for. Is Maverick overrated? What about Millennium Force or Steel Vengeance? Are these rides overrated? And the answer is, it depends. It depends on who you ask. It depends on the kind of ride you get on it. So, all three of these I'm putting in the Super Elite tier. And that might be really polarizing. We'll talk about Millennium Force first. Millennium Force is barely a Super Elite coaster in my opinion, because so many people love this ride. This ride is so iconic. Of course, it opened in 2000 as the tallest and fastest roller coaster in the world, the first Giga coaster, or coaster over 300 feet tall. It has an incredible color scheme, and it's got a cool theme. The music in the station is iconic. It has a beautiful view of the whole park and like Lake Erie as you're going up the lift hill. It's just such a great ride. And it's not forceless like some people will say. Some people call it Millennium Forceless. It is pretty intense, but it doesn't have a lot of cool elements like a lot of modern rides do have today. So if you haven't been on this the first time, don't expect a lot of crazy elements. It's more of a showcase of speed and intensity. I had a night ride in 2022 in the very back row, and it was just incredible. Oh my gosh, it was so good. The airtime on the first drop is solid. It's very intense. There are a couple of almost gray out moments, in my opinion. The tunnels are cool. It's a long ride. It doesn't feel short, so it's worth waiting a long time for this ride. Again, it's got a great showcase of speed. If you're near the front of the train, you're going to get so much wind in your face. Although be careful of the bugs if you're out there during the buggy season. And there is some cool airtime moments towards the end on some of those hills. So overall, Millennium Force is a great ride. I know so many people that think this is their favorite roller coaster overall and favorite of all time. So that is why it is in the super elite category for me. Again, it doesn't have a lot of crazy, awesome modern elements like a lot of newer coasters do today, which is why it's going to be a little bit lower in my ranking. But this coaster has aged so well, and it's still a top 3 coaster at Cedar Point for sure. Next, we have Maverick, and Maverick is also super elite. I do think it is a little bit overrated, and oftentimes we do skip Maverick when we go to Cedar Point because the capacity is so awful. It is so terrible, and it's such an unreliable ride. But in spite of that, it is still a great ride. This was a big transition coaster for Intamin and whatnot, because they could prove, hey, we can make a great ride without having to make it super tall or super fast. The Beyond Vertical Drop is awesome. It has just a really good variety of elements. It's got quick, whippy transitions and inversions. It's got solid airtime. It's got good showcases of speed. The launches are pretty intense overall. It's got a tunnel. The theming is good. Like, there's a lot of love for Maverick, but there's also a lot of hate for Maverick, and I really don't understand it. Because, like, it's just a solid ride overall. It's a great blitz coaster. And I think if Maverick were at any other park other than Cedar Point, it would be praised even more so, because people have such high expectations and high standards for Cedar Point that, you know, something like Millennium Force and Maverick over the years kind of lose their luster a little bit. But if this were at any other, like, smaller park, man, people would go crazy over this and would say, oh, it's a top 10 coaster, of course. But because it's at Cedar Point, I think it gets bashed a little bit more than it would otherwise. But overall, I do think Maverick is very close to a 10 out of 10 coaster. It's just sad that the capacity is always so bad and that it is so unreliable. Like, it's broken down every time I've ever been to Cedar Point. So come to Cedar Point and expect it to be down for a portion of the day, no matter what. Yeah, I think it's like, it has to do with the sensors and the launch and whatnot are just so finicky, and it's such a pain. Like, there were multiple times where I'd gotten right up to the front of the station and it broke down for hours. So it can be pretty frustrating waiting in line for Maverick, and it's almost always going to be at least an hour wait, no matter what day you go. So just so you know, ride Maverick early, get to it. It's definitely worth the ride, but it's not one that you're going to lap unless you have Fast Lane or something else. And finally, Steel Vengeance. Steel Vengeance is currently my #1 overall coaster, so of course, it's going to be super elite. It's really like an endurance test. It's so incredible. The airtime is so good. It's very smooth. It's marketed to have the most airtime of any coaster in the world. This is just such a huge improvement on what Mean Streak used to be, which used to be horrible. It just has everything I want in a coaster. The restraints aren't horrible. They're not great, but they're not bad. It's intense. It's got great airtime. It's got a good drop. It's tall. It's a long ride time. Like, Steel Vengeance is everything that I love in a roller coaster, which is why it's my current #1 overall, and why I think it's super elite. It's one of the best roller coasters in the world, no doubt. You know, you might think that Steel Vengeance is not one of the best. It all depends on what you prefer in a roller coaster. Like, if you don't like such crazy, intense airtime, then, you know, you might not like Steel Vengeance so much, but that's what I absolutely love. So that's why I'm going to put it above Millennium Force and Maverick. But again, Steel Vengeance can get really long lines too, but it does move a little bit smoother than Maverick in my experience. So absolutely get a ride on Steel Vengeance. And it's pretty incredible that Cedar Point, in my opinion, has 3 super elite rides, 3 potential top 10 roller coasters in the US, possibly the world, depending on who you ask, of course, because everybody has different preferences, everyone has different opinions, so that's okay if you are thinking something differently than this. As you can see, it's very top heavy. They've got a lot of great rides here too, and they've got a lot of okay rides, and it's really funny because all of these that are in the great or above category will usually have at least a half an hour wait or more on a given day. And then everything else in the okay category will usually be less than a half an hour. you can actually get a decent amount of rides done here on a given day, depending on what you go and ride. Because you could go and ride Rougaroo probably 10 times in an hour, or you could go wait for Maverick for 2 hours and it break down when you get to the station. So just plan your day out accordingly when you go to Cedar Point. It's almost always crowded here, so don't ever expect it to be dead. And make a plan, and you're going to have a great day at Cedar Point because there are so many roller coasters, and especially after Dragster gets fixed up, oh man, this is going to be so incredible. So that pretty much sums up my thoughts on all the roller coasters at Cedar Point. We've almost got 3 distinct tiers. You've got like the amazing super elite coasters, and these are the ones that usually have, 2-hour waits. And then you've got the great coasters. These usually have about an hour wait. And then the okay ones, everybody usually tends to avoid, usually half an hour or less, depending on how busy of a day you go, of course. So again, let me know your comments down below. I'm really interested in hearing what you guys have to say and what you guys think as well. Again, just do it respectfully. Everyone has different opinions, everyone has different preferences, and that's okay. That's a great thing. I'll be coming out with a video pretty soon on a park review on Cedar Point, and I have been there quite a few times, so I do have a lot to share about that. So look forward to that in the future. Make sure to like if you enjoyed the video, and subscribe for more coaster content every single week. I hope you guys have a wonderful day, and enjoy the ride. I'll see you next time.